In this video, me and my buddy Jay, one of the creators of Cult of the Lamb, discuss exactly how he made a game that sold over 1 million copies in less than a week. And if you stick around through the entire video, you're gonna walk away with top tier advice from, well, in my opinion, a developer responsible for one of the greatest indie game success stories. I'll be honest, man, I'm super duper jealous because you guys have figured out virality, and that is an amazing achievement for any game developer. You've got eyes now, and I don't see it ever ending.
We've got an awesome social media and community manager who joined the team, Josie and Lorna. They're both just amazing, and Josie particularly has a very, like, an evil sense of humor, and I think she enjoys kind of winding people up, but also is really good at, and I think this is key, is like knowing how far you can take it and then like going, okay, don't worry, it was a joke. Yeah, so it's been really good. I mean, the Q landing with Sins of the Flesh is that, yeah, again, sex sells. News to everyone, shocking. But that's been the key. I think what's really core to what we've learned is definitely, you know, we're making the game, we're game designers, so we want fun core systems, but really you need to have some kind of hook that you're tying it all together on. So like at the moment we're talking about our next, what update we're going to do next, and we've got all these cool ideas, but we're sort of like, how do we tie that together into a coherent package? And that's really crucial. And I think a lot of indie game developers don't like that sort of thinking, where it's like, well, it shouldn't be about the marketing, it should be about the brilliant idea, but it's like, yeah, it should be about both, and they're both really important.
Yeah, I polled my audience on Twitter. I said, would you rather make $500,000 every year for 4 years making a game you hate, or would you rather just make a game you love with barely scratching by? And the majority of game developers said, I just want to scratch by and make something that I love. And I'm not saying there's a right answer here, but if you want to be a full-time game developer and do what you and I are doing, you've got to be willing to suffer a little bit. The suffering that I'm doing lately for our next game is I'm secretly polling my audience to figure out, like, what's actually a good hook here for our next game?
Yeah.
And so it's a painful process of like looking for the ideas that people really latch onto, because the ideas that I think I'm gonna latch onto aren't necessarily the ideas that are gonna sell and make us money. Because at the end of the day, when you're making decent money for your game, there's this sort of, as long as you're not addicted to money, there is a freedom that comes with that, you know, and you can make anything you want. And I think that all starts with a really, really great hook.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Absolutely. It's not so much that I would say, you know, we definitely didn't sell out. We made something kind of edgy and that we really wanted to make. But it's more about like, how do you present your ideas? So it's not selling out, because I don't feel that that's what Cult of the Lamb is. I think it's like, it's a very, to me, it's a very cool game that I'm really proud that we've made. But it's more about, we're conscious about how do you present those ideas in a way that like people can consume immediately. I kind of tell the story a lot about when we started the game. The core of the game was the loop. So it's like, you've got your base, and then you go out and you dungeon crawl and you find resources to come back to build up your base so that you can go upgrade your character and go further. And you know, that was the core. But the cult thing didn't come in till much later, because we spent about 9 months kind of arguing about what the game should be about. We had all these crazy ideas. One of them was like, you know, you're a lost god on the back of a flying whale, and we would go to conventions and talk to people like, yeah, we're working on this game, you're this lost god, and people's eyes would just like glaze over, and they'd just be like, I don't. So we knew it wasn't right. We just kept going. When we found, like, you start a cult, it's like four words, and people would get it straight away. And it's just that power of communication. So it's, again, like, it's not like choosing to sell out at all. It's just like, take your great idea, but, you know, think about how you're communicating it, how are you showing people and getting people interested. How are you getting people interested? Because again, like, I've done both, and it's a lot more fun when more people play your game. Let me tell you that straight up. It's not fun when you've poured 4 years into a game and the next day you've got to go, right, I need to bring in the next deal because there's no money.
You told me this, you were helping me sort of do some ideation with Twisted Tower, which is our current game. And you helped me so much with that. And you formulated for me something that a lot of my audience has heard me say this, but I call it the big butt principle. The big butt, B-U-T.
Oh, okay.
Not B-U-T-T.
All right. Okay.
Yeah, my mind is not as much in the gutter as yours.
It's not, you'll get that.
Yeah, right. But it's called the Big Butt Principle, and you were sort of the impetus of this. The Big Butt Principle is blank but blank. Okay, so for Hollow Knight, it's Metroidvania but with bugs.
Yeah.
Right? With Portal, it's first-person shooter but with portals. With your game, it's Binding of Isaac but cult management.
Stardew Valley,
right?
Or RimWorld, you know.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, that's how we came up with it. It was like, you know, so much of it was like looking at what didn't work with our previous game and responding to what didn't work. You know, there'd be no Cult of the Lamb if we hadn't had our other games, because we saw, you know, that people would see our previous games and think things like, oh, it's a kid's game, and write it off. So we're like, oh God, we got to go. And we saw Hollow Knight, which came out at a similar time. We're like, we got to go darker, and things like single-use content. And it's like, okay, well, you know, you have 120 levels, but once you played it once, that's it, and it's gone. And that's incredibly time-consuming, expensive to make, and in the, like, you know, with streaming, it's like you don't even need to play it yourself. You can watch someone else play it, and then you've consumed it. You don't need to buy it. So like it's just so, you know, looking at what are the games that aren't single use, and they were like colony sim, farm sim games, you know, Stardew Valley, RimWorld, and the other one that was big at the time was the roguelikes, and you could play Enter the Gungeon over and over and over again, and you know, the content just kept getting used and used and used, and like, okay, so let's take, like your idea, Stardew Valley, but Enter the Gungeon. And I think you're absolutely right. It's like seeing what works and giving it a unique hook. And the other point about why I think that's such a good idea is that it's that level of newness, but familiarity. So you're saying like, it's this game, but this. And people are like, oh, I get that. I know Portal, I know first-person shooters, and I love puzzles. Okay, it's a first-person shooter, puzzles. I get it. But when you're like, you know, oh, it's a game where we do this and this and that, and I'm sorry, I can't think of a good example off the top of my head, but people...
Well, I think the idea, the original idea you had is a great example of that, where you're a god on the back of a whale. It's like, it's hard to explain.
Yeah.
You know, it's really hard to explain. And you helped me so much because that call we had a year and a half ago, because I realized that the shorter the description of your game, the more likely it is that it's going to be a good idea. It's like sales. It's like a salesman needs to be able to get his point across. He needs to knock on someone's door and be able to sell someone something in 15 seconds or they're out, you know? And the same is true with games. And it, you know, people might be hearing this and be thinking like the light bulb's going off and they're like, oh, it's that easy. No, it's not easy at all. Like to be able to make a 3-word description of your game that is actually creates an itch in somebody is so difficult. And our previous guest, Gavin, who created Choo Choo Charles, Spider Train, he actually beat you in terms of the shortness. Spider Train. Like, like that's all you need.
Love it.
Yep, that's all you need. So, well, can I ask you, you know, do you feel like your previous projects had a hook?
Not to the same extent. No, definitely not. And it was never something that we thought about. I mean, so our 2 commercial games were The Adventure Pals and Never Give Up. Never Give Up was a sort of more of a sort of work for hire project where we collaborated with a publisher. The Adventure Pals was kind of our baby, and it was kind of the game that we kind of imagined, you know, the indie game dream. We're like, this is the game. We're throwing our hearts and souls into it for like 3-4 years. This is the one that's gonna take off. And of course, it didn't. But you know, we needed that to get to Cult of the Lamb. You know, so its hook was really like jimmied in at the end, and it was sort of like, you know, it was 2016, so the hook was really like lol random. You know, it was like, oh, lol random. Back then, that was kind of still interesting. Now, not so much now, but it was kind of like we learned like by going to convention after convention after convention, talking to thousands of people trying to pitch it, looking at their faces when we talked about it and seeing when they would smile. And so you're a young boy with a magical giraffe in your backpack and you're on a quest to rescue your dad before he's turned into a hot dog. And you would kind of see this sort of like smirk with the giraffe, and then the hot dog thing, you sort of see the like, oh, smile kind of thing. So there was definitely that. Maybe that's where we learned it. I would probably wouldn't take so much of the credit. Julian, who's so Julian, myself and Jim founded Massive Monster, and Julian was definitely the one who's like marketing first, is kind of drilled it into us. I sort of came to them and I was like, hey, look at my cool loop, you know, the base building and done. And he's like, that's great, but it sucks because what's your loop? Like, what's your hook? Sorry.
Yeah.
So I had the loop.
Yeah.
He insisted on the hook.
So the Adventure Pals hook wasn't a hook. It was silly, but it wasn't a hook.
Silly as a hook, which isn't great, I think. There was no like, you had the giraffe in the backpack who would have cool abilities and things, but it was, it was just not strong enough a player fantasy.
You can have a great hook, but if you don't fulfill the promises of the hook, you're going to get mostly negative reviews or even mixed, Sometimes I would prefer to get mostly negative over mixed, just because at least there's some polarization going on there. The point is that I wouldn't even know where to begin with a creating a cult management sim, or it's so difficult to fulfill that promise of that hook.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It was very hard. It was very, very hard, and we didn't know for the longest time, and we knew we had to do it. It got to the point where we wrote a list of like, we went on these websites like what makes a cult kind of thing, and we came up with a list. And we went through it like, do we have this? Do we have indoctrination? Do we have like, belief systems? Do we have rituals? Do we have all of these things that we were like, had to like tick off, and we had to make it meaningful in the loop of the game, which was really hard. So I think the sacrifice is quite a good example where we put it in quite early because we knew we needed it, right?
So did you plan all this out in a GDD?
Oh God, no. And the reason being,
tell me about that, because a lot of game developers right now are probably listening, thinking, what's his design process here? Because the professional, quote unquote, way to do things, is to write all this out before you even start your game. What was your process like?
I think, it would sum up in one word: iteration. It was just brutal iteration and being brutal with each other. And
so making stuff, you're making the game, and then you spend all this time and money making something, and then you scrap it and then do something else.
Exactly. We got to the point where we were like A/B testing systems. So we would just have a Boolean, and we'd just say like, another good example is the sermons. Hooking them up to leveling up your character, again, came very late, which is crazy, right? Because the whole loop of the game is the followers make you better in the dungeon, and the dungeon makes you better for the followers because you've got resources, kind of thing. And we just didn't see that till right at the end. So we had like, for example, we just would have Booleans that, is the sermon mode player level up, true or false? Or is it, or are you getting gold or something, whatever.
Yeah.
And we would just get so into that process where we'd just be like, right, we argued so much that we would just be like, rather than arguing, let's try both. That's where we got to, where it was just like, okay, you got that idea, we don't have the time or energy to argue, put them both in and let's try them. And we started saying, let the game tell us what it wants to be.
I'm just fascinated because are you opposed to a GDD? Like, what are your thoughts on a GDD? Because like, I feel so guilty when I do what you're saying, and I do it all the time, which is, it's quote unquote wasteful. I feel guilty because I'm like, I should have been able to plan this better. I should have been able to plan this game design better. And then I sort of slap myself on the wrist and think I wasted my team's time. What you're saying is, no, this is a necessary process of any great game to build it out as opposed to write it out.
Because we were doing something that we were doing a lot of things that we hadn't come across before. So again, going to that like Metroidvania, it's like, write it out. Fine. I'm not opposed to GDDs. But we were moving so fast that we didn't have time to write and maintain a GDD because there just wasn't, right? So we had to write stuff for publishers to get funding and things. But from that point on, we would, like, I do a lot of slideshows, or I use a tool called Miro, where I'll like plan it all out and stuff, but then like, that's what we're doing now, this week, that's what we're doing. And then that's like scrapped. And then next week it's like, right, we're going to move this around and this is going to go here. So no, I'm not against GDDs at all, but they didn't work in this case because we just didn't have a time or manpower or energy or need, because we were such a small team as well, and so kind of moving so quickly that ideas would be scrapped before people had even heard of them.
I'm encouraged to hear you say this, because I think for my next game, I just want to sort of just feel it out, as opposed to try and type it all out.
Definitely. And you need that. And you need to be responsive to how the game is feeling and coming together.